Okay, good morning, everybody. So we're going to take a look at some of the next step, I'm going to say, in our analysis. Um, and in doing so, we're going to review some of the things that I did wrong last class. Not a lot, but still, we should get a better result after our analysis today, and that's really the goal. To do this, we're going to need Remnux running because we're going to be controlling network traffic this time. We're going to be intercepting any attempts at network communications from our malware and analyzing that so we can understand exactly what it's trying to do. And we'll see that going forward. We're not going to be able to really understand it just yet. We're going to have to drill into the code a little bit more to try and extract some keys that it might be using for encrypting that data. So we're going to have to do a little bit more research before we truly understand what's going on. But again, from a triage point of view, it's a lot of very suspicious behavior with this malware. We can quickly identify that and flag it in our incident software. So to that end, you're going to need Remnux running today. You're also going to need your Flare VM. And your Flare VM should be a restored version of your cloned backup that you have. So you're going to need to clone your backup again to make that your current version because we want to go through all the processes, all the steps again to try and figure out what the network communications are. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm logging in. The word password is password. W0RD bang with an uppercase P. And this should be a relatively clean instance of my software. Perfect. Oh, that means that none of my software is installed. So this is a perfect time for me to go through and capture all of the steps that I've done in our last class together. Okay. So none of the software that we installed in our last class together is installed, so we're going to have to do that. Fortunately, they are still in my downloads directory here. In Remnux. There are the files that I want, including the process monitor tool that I have, or PC. What the hell is it called? I'm sorry, I just finished a class with the other one. Not Procdoc, Procmon? Procmon, yeah, Procmon. We need the Procmon configuration file as well over in our target environment, and none of it is here. So we're going to create a new folder, and that can be our proc stuff. That's going to be fine. I need to go into my directory that I want to make available to Flare, and I want to start my Python. I think Python 2 will work. On port 80. Let's see if that works. Looks like it worked. So I can go over launch. Let's launch Chrome. Let's not use Internet Explorer, even though this is supposed to be for testing Internet Explorer. And I can go to my IP address. And it is, of course, 25. And there is all of the software that I'm going to want. Now, we've already done the IDA free. Well, you should have done this. This is for deployment in Remnux. But these other ones, we're going to want those installed in our environment. We're going to want GraphViz. We downloaded that together. We could use either PinCap, WinPCap, or NPCap. Doesn't really matter, but you want to have one of those. And then, of course, we want that config file for a Procmon. So just download, save link as, and save all four of them. We don't want them in brbbot. We want it in the proc stuff. So save it there. PC, save link as, catch up, proc stuff, perfect. The third one is going to be installer for GraphViz, perfect. And then finally WinPcap, save link as, perfect. So now we want to start setting these things up. Now that we have them downloaded, we should be good to go. Now for those of you who are paying attention, and I know that's all of you because you're all very good students, you're going to realize that I keep redoing a bunch of work here. And there's, from an academic point of view, there's value in redoing these steps so that they make sense to you, so you can understand your environment, which I have been preaching since I first started teaching you last semester. You must understand your environment, and resetting these things up over and over again crystallizes that. However, if you're paying attention, you'll very quickly realize that you should maybe do another clone. Once you have everything set up perfectly, maybe you should clone the machine at that point. I'm not going to, not for the least of which is I don't really have hard drive space because freaking Age of Empires 4 came out recently and took up all my hard drive space. But that doesn't change the fact that there's value in going through and understanding when to do snapshots and clones of your environment. There's real value in that. And maybe after you have it set up, maybe you want to power down Flare, do a quick clone at that point, power it back up, and then continue on with your attack at that point. Maybe the moment before you detonate your malware, when you have all of the software in place, maybe that's a good time to do a clone. I'll leave that to you to determine. But I'm going to install GraphViz. I agree. Add to all users, it doesn't really matter, because all we're trying to do is we're trying to have the dot executable available to our proc dot. Perfect. We also want to find out or tell procmon to load that configuration. So we're going to launch procmon. And with procmon, we're going to stop capturing. We're going to import a configuration. We're going to go to our desktop. We are going to go to our desktop. No, desktop, I clicked on the wrong one. We're going to go to our proc.stuff and we're going to load that configuration. Perfect. Now we can clear our activities here. That's fine. All right. So we're ready to do that. Now, if this was a complete activity, I would also fire up Redshot. Okay. You know what? I'm going to do that just so we do everything together and we know all of the steps that we want to do. Sometimes Redshot doesn't fire up. There we go. Very, very frustrating. It didn't want to do that. Okay. So that's good. We should probably fire a process hacker as well, because we're going to want to manage that. And as I say in the notes, you're going to want to make sure you can actually see the Explorer, because it's inside of Explorer that we are going to probably see our malware become executed. Now when we fire a process hacker, we notice that one of the columns is missing. So let's address that. Right click on any of the column headers, select choose columns, scroll down to integrity, make that visible, and what I do is I move it up to right after the CPU. All right, so you can see what's running at high integrity, which is rare but is often an indicator of malware in our environments, having stuff running at the high level. Okay, so we have that in place as well. we're also going to get ready to do our network analysis before we detonate. So all of the steps I've done right now, I haven't done my first red shot, because when you do red shot, you want to do your first one just before you detonate. So I'm going to get everything else set up before I do my red shot, only because there's going to capture everything that Windows does. And as we've seen, Windows is a chatty little bit of operating system. It's always got stuff going on. So the longer the time difference between my first and second shots in registry shot or red shot, the longer the difference between the two, the more irrelevant data it will capture. And we don't want that. Okay? Alrighty. So the first thing we want to do is ensure that our environment is set up correctly. We should only have 2 adapters working inside of Remnux. Let's head over to Remnux and make sure. I've got my Windows website, my temporary web server running here. I'm going to leave that running right now because I'm going to need that again. So another tab, zoom in, IP adder, perfect, that looks pretty good. I've got 2 separate adapters here working, that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to like that, yeah. I have ETH0 set to use DHCP. It grabs an IP address. It's always the same one, but it grabs an IP. I set ETH1, obviously there's a typo here. ETH1 needs to have a static address. There's a typo in that. I just noticed that for the first time. There's a typo right there. Interesting. Anyway, ETH1 has got a static address. Now, it's a little bit dated because it's now ENP0S3 and ENP0S8. But you should already have your environment in place. Alright? Don't worry about the gateway address setting for your separate one. We've already done that. Now we can verify our network settings in Flare. Well, that's a quick test as well. We can open up the command prompt in ipconfig, and it'll tell us, all right? First of all, it's telling us with the 169.254 address, it's telling us there's something wrong with this adapter. Well, yeah, there's something wrong with it. That's the gateway address. Oops, correction, my apologies. That's the gateway adapter. Correction, that's the NAT adapter that we have unplugged in VirtualBox. It's a virtual adapter, we virtually unplugged it, but that is the NAT adapter unplugged. So it's not getting a valid IP, which is perfect. And then we have the second adapter here configured to a static IP that we understand that is using our IP address of our Remnux as its gateway address. So what's happening here is that all network traffic from Flare should be going to Remnux because that's the gateway, that's the address that it's going to go through to try and find the rest of the networks on the internet. So that's what we've done. We've configured Windows and Flare VM to use Remnux as its gateway address. So again, we're good with that. If not, you can take a look at the earlier notes or let me know. Okay? So, we're ready, and yeah, you know what? We're pretty good here. Okay? We're pretty good. Questions? Did somebody have a question? Okay. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, we also need to make sure that brbbot is placed. I don't think I've done that in my test environment. So let's go make sure that that is in place as well. So that's closed down, that's fine, that's completely fine. So the last thing we need to do is deploy our malware to the correct location. Now I made a mistake last time. I got excited and I detonated my malware without having everything in place, and I want to make sure I don't make that mistake again. So I'm going through everything and make sure I don't miss. So there's going to be a lot of pauses in my conversation, and that's why. So I go to the IE user directory because we're all using the same VM, so we're all logged in as IE user, and then app data roaming, and then it's in here that we want to copy our malware. Okay? So I'm going to take and open up the folder where I downloaded my malware, right click, copy, desktop, right click, paste, so that the executable is now sitting in that directory. Perfect. Okay. I can then right click and drag. It says move, but I've got the right click button held down. So when I let go, it gives me a pop-up. And no, I don't want to move it. I want to create a shortcut on my desktop to that. Because when we took a look at the initial paperwork a couple of weeks ago, it told us that the brbbot was found in the users folder app data roaming. That's where it was found. So we have to replicate that before we detonate it. Perfect. Right click, and we're going to let it run as root so that it has unrestricted access to doing whatever it wants to do in the system. We're going to let it run as root so that if something happens, it's not going to be impeded because of permissions. We're going to let it have free reign, and it can do as much damage as it wants. Okay? Any questions? Alrighty. Brbbot is the other application we're going to look at. We can configure it now. I'll record this process. We might as well do all of our prep work before we start our detonation. We might as well do all of the things that are necessary. Now we're going to have to re-detonate our malware. So I'm going to ask you to be a little bit, ignore certain things. In the wild we wouldn't do these steps, but that's okay. Would you like to check for it, as we said before? No, it can't. It's not connected to the internet, typically. Do you want to participate in beta tests? Again, not connected to the internet, we're going to say no. It does need us to configure it, so let's configure it. It wants to know where WinDump TCP dump is. I'm just going to tell it to go to the desktop and use npcap. I think it's an installer, or WinPcap. I'm just going to use npcap. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter because we're not going to do network analysis with it, so it doesn't matter. But it does need to know where the graphiz executable called dot is. So we're going to want to do that. So I click on it. I go to my C drive. I go to Program Files. I go down to graphiz. There it is there. I go to the bin directory. And then you will see the .execute. Again, a .exe file. Again, I'm in Program Files, graphiz, bin. And I'm selecting the .exe. I'm going to open that. And now it's going to have that. And that should be okay. Hide unvisited graph bars. Yeah, we can leave those defaults are probably okay at that point. So we can click on OK. And now we are ready with brbbot to import the results of procmon when it runs. All right. We've got everything pretty much in place right now. Everything is ready to go. So why don't I do my first shot yet again? Let's just assume that we haven't done this a bunch of times already. This is the first real good time that we're going to try and do a dynamic analysis. So let's do our first shot. Even though this is going to add about 5 minutes to the lecture, maybe 10 minutes to the lecture, I think it's worthwhile revisiting. Before I do my first shot, again, I have to make sure that this is configured properly. Plain text is fine, but I also want to scan the directories. And I don't want to just scan Windows. I want to scan the entire hard drive, C:\\. So I say scan directories and I make sure that the directory is C:\\, and it'll scan all subdirectories as well. The output path is just going to throw it somewhere. No, I don't want it to throw it somewhere. I want it in my desktop in my brbbot. Now this isn't proc.stuff. This is the working directory where my artifacts are going to go, and that's in the brbbot directory on the desktop. So let's make that the location. So now this is configured properly. Everything else is configured properly. The delta between before and after detonating the malware should be less, the least amount. Now's the time to do our first shot. Click on first shot and shoot. And as we saw, after 5.5 seconds, it'll look like it's hung up, but it's really not. It's still doing stuff in the background. You can see this in the status bar down here. With process monitor running, it'll show you activity and you can see stuff happening. So you're probably good. Moving your mouse around though is probably going to add data that you don't necessarily want to see. And after about a minute, it will calm down and finish. But there we are. It's done its first shot. Okay. So it's got its first shot. It's got something to compare it against for the second shot. I have a lot of my stuff up and running in place. I've modified process monitor, so I have the correct config file so I can analyze it in process proc.dot. Everything looks good. I am going to start capturing process monitor and I'm going to run brbbot for 30 seconds. So start capturing, boom, double click on the executable, time it so I can see 30 seconds. That turned out pretty good. So I'll wait until 8 o'clock, 28 minutes and 30 seconds, and then I will stop the process. And of course I'm going to stop the process in process hacker. But I'm going to give it a good 30 seconds. Most of what's going to happen is going to happen in the first couple of seconds. As a general rule, we give it about 30 seconds. If it looks like it's an incomplete process, that's when you stop it. So there's my brbbot, right click, terminate. I am going to stop capturing. And before I do anything else, before I make any other changes, I stopped capturing. Before I save the results, all right, brbbot is not running. I've stopped capturing. I'm going to do my second shot right now. And then I'll save the results of process monitor or procmon. Before I start adding files, before I tell procmon to do more work, I just want to know what happened specifically around brbbot running. Not the monitoring tools that I have running alongside of it. Just what happened with brbbot. So I'm just going to do my second shot at this time. And I think this is a pretty good workflow for this point of the analysis. The nice thing about Redshot, the nice thing about Redshot is that I have time to have some coffee. Perfect. So it's done its second shot. I've done my first shot, I've done my second shot. I can now compare the results. You can do compare and output. We're just going to do compare first. We'll let it do its thing. Note again, I am not capturing in procmon. Here's my results of the differences between the two. And now I can take a look at what that was. And it's going to open it up in Notepad for me. And this is the delta between the two. And we can use this to understand the differences between the two. Okay? And you probably should take a look at some of this. A bunch of registry stuff is happening. You can tell because it's all H key. And there's a lot of registry stuff happening. And programs shouldn't be running that kind of stuff in the registry. And then it gets into file systems that are different, all right? Up to that point, it was all registry stuff. And then files that were added. This is the interesting thing. It's added 6 files to the file system. One of them is the brbbconfig.temp file. Well, that's interesting as well. Let's go see if that's still there. When I go back to this directory, I now have a new file there. We haven't talked about this before, but we're going to talk about it today. I've got something called brbbconfig.temp. Well, I want a copy of that. I'm going to copy that and put that in my work folder as well. Paste it here. Not a shortcut. I actually want a copy of that file for analysis. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so it created a temp file, and if we take a look at it, well, you know what? Let's take a look at it now. If you try and take a look at this file, open it up with Notepad, Sublime. Well, maybe we'll open it up in Sublime. It can be a bit of a resource, but let's open it up with Sublime and see what it tells us. Okay, well, first off, it isn't much of a resource, but clearly there's some encryption going on here. Clearly this is all encrypted something. I don't know what that is. It's one long line. It's probably encrypted. I don't know what's going on here, but I'm going to have to deconstruct that later on. So there's something going on here. But we captured it. We took a look at what was going here and we captured it over here. Perfect. Alrighty. What else is going on? Oh, there's some other stuff going on here as well, but we'll just ignore those. It's the brbbconfig.temp that we really want. So that was interesting. File, save as, and we're going to save this as a reg shot.
Hi, Steve.
Yeah.
Only consider brb.temp file among others file.
Why?
Why you do not consider other file?
It's a very good question, and it's the same thing as what we were doing when we were doing pen testing. We can take a look at each and every other file, and we probably should, but doing that during the lecture is too time consuming. That's the only reason. I am doing the curated, I'm doing the streamlined process where I take you down the right path. In the wild though, in the real world, your question is completely valid. You would check all of those files. Completely correct, sir. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. No, it was a great question and a fair question. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, red shot results. We're going to save those in our brbbot working directory as well. Okay, we're getting some good artifacts in here. So we're going to have to start thinking about these things now. Okay, that was from a previous attack, obviously. Okay, so that's good. So we've got red shot done. All right, we can close the results and we can probably close down red shot. We've got procmon and its results, and we haven't saved anything from here yet. So I'm going to file, save, and I am going to save them in native PML just in case I want to load them again, and I am going to save them and this is unfiltered brbbot procmon. It doesn't matter. Yeah. All right, it doesn't matter what you call it, you can use whatever you want, but it's going to be a PML file. Perfect, click on OK. But we also want to save the CSV file, because the CSV file is what was what proc.dot uses. So we're going to save that as well. Perfect. We're also going to filter our results. We're going to apply a filter, and it is where the process name is, and because we said process name, it'll give us a list of processes we can choose. And it, of course, the process we are interested in is brbbot.exe. Then include it. We want to add that filter and apply that filter. And then OK. And then our list of results drops from almost 200,000 down to 2,500. It's a far more manageable result set. File, save again. We want everything in CSV, but this time we're going to call it filtered. brbbot in procmon. Perfect. And save the filtered one as a CSV and save it as a PML file. Perfect. So we now have 4 files that we have captured from our procmon analysis in CSV and PML format for both filtered and unfiltered procmon captures. Perfect. So I think we're good with this one. We can probably close this one down as well. Process Hacker we can leave running. That's probably going to be okay. All right. But now we can tell procmon to load one of those results. And this is something that we kind of missed last class. So we're going to try this again. I'm going to go to brbbot. I have both my filtered and unfiltered. Let's take a look at the filtered one first. And when you do this, you need to give it a process to look at. It really only has brbbot, so I'm going to tell it to do that. And then hopefully when we click on refresh, it should generate an interactive experience. Perfect. And this is what I was hoping to get to last time. And you can zoom in on and see exactly what's going on in your attack. All right, you can drag it around as well and center it a bit, but this is what we want to see. Okay, so when you animate it and tell it to play, it goes through the process and tells you exactly what it's doing, including creating brb config.tmp, which is why I focused on it before. It also does some registry stuff. This seems a little light though. Okay, that was interesting, but you know what? Let's take a look at the unfiltered thing. Open that up, and again we're going to tell it
Stephen,
yeah.
is it similar packet analyzing tools like Wireshark?
We're going to do a Wireshark analysis soon.
No, I mean these tools is similar to the same Wireshark tools. It's a graphical, visual packet analyzer tools, right?
Oh, it could be. It could very well be. This GraphViz is a thing used, so it would be Wireshark, but probably in the Windows world. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I only use Wireshark a little bit, and what I use it is for packet capturing and not for animating like this. So I don't know how to answer your question, sir, I'm afraid. When I'm using Wireshark, I'll show you how I use Wireshark. I just capture packets and look at them manually. Okay? Okay. So I'm going to tell it to take a look at brbbot again. Select by double clicking, and then tell it to refresh. And we'll see if it gives us a little bit more this time. And it does. All right. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to turn off the animation. If you want to be able to see what's going on, all right, it's not going to let me zoom out. That's it. That's about as big as it's going to be. But as you can see, the filtered and the unfiltered results give you two completely different sets. All right, basically the unfiltered gave me a bunch of extra registry stuff here. Now there's value here. There's definitely value here. But by focusing on the filtered results before, we kind of got closer to what we were looking for. Again, there's no single right answer. You're going to have to try stuff and see what you get. But the animation is going to be the same. Boom, 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 and then it starts doing its other stuff. So it does a bunch of registry changes, and then it spawns off and starts messing with the file system. Very interesting. Very interesting. But that's great. I can now file and save this. Again, I'm going to save it in my proc.stuff, and I'm just going to save this as brbbot analysis as a proc.session. Save that because that's a great artifact. Okay? That is the better example of what I was hoping to demonstrate for you last week. Any questions? Oh, no. That's the one I want to close down. Perfect. So I've turned off a lot of those activities. Alrighty. Now we can go into starting it. This time, we're going to launch Wireshark and see what happens in this environment. Now, I probably should have done that before, but we're just going to do it now. We're going to launch Wireshark. And we are going to have it take a look at what it's analyzing. So I'm going to tell it to analyze the adapter that I know is the one I want to run this analysis on. All right. We don't want to analyze NAT. We want to analyze the host-only adapter. So I'm going to select that, and it is running here, and it's waiting for information. Now, if you want, you should probably go through and restart the entire process again, but we're not going to do that. But I'm going to launch brbbot again. Let it run for 30 seconds. Again, I got lucky with the time. And while it's running, you can actually take a look at what's happening in Wireshark. And you can see that it's starting to capture some packets. Well, that's great news. 20 seconds have passed. My brbbot is still running. I'm going to terminate that now. Perfect. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to stop capturing. Hopefully it won't delete the packets that I have captured. Okay, but right away, it's a standard query to brbbot.3dstruts.by. So it's trying to query. If you take a look at the results here, it's trying to get access to something called brbbot. And it's trying really hard to get to this site, brb.3dtuts.by. It's trying very hard to get to that domain. And that's typical. That is very typical for malware to go out and try and hit a server somewhere, which is why when you're in the middle of an attack, all of a sudden you'll get a whole list of domains to block. It's easier to manage by domains. Now, some attacks will use static IPs, but it's easy to block static IPs. So what they'll do is they'll use domain names, and then they can change the IP based on that. So there's no, again, perfect tool for hackers, but they'll do one or the other. Regardless, we see that it is trying to connect to this domain, brb.3dtuts.by. So we need it to resolve so it can move on to the next step in the network attack. Now, the reason why, any questions before I go forward? The reason why we configured everything to run through Remnux was that we wanted to control all of that traffic. So what we are going to do is we are going to open up another terminal, and we are going to tell it to launch a fake DNS server, simply called fake DNS. So what happens is that all DNS requests are going to hit against this, and it's going to resolve back. We looked at this when we first set it up. However, it's running fake DNS on the wrong adapter, which is a problem for us. So again, you must understand your environment. We don't want to run fake DNS on the wrong adapter. Now, there may be a way of running fake DNS on the correct adapter, but I'm not going to do that. I'm simply going to disable the adapter running. Okay? How do you do that? There it is. If you're following along in the document, I'm on page 3 of the handout where it's running it on the wrong adapter, so I'm going to run it on the correct adapter right here. Sudo IP link set dev enp0 s3 enp0 s3 down. IP adder enp0 s3 is down, so my NAT is no longer working. So when I run fake DNS again, it starts working on my host only adapter. When I first ran fake DNS, it ran it on the NAT, and that's not the adapter I need it running on. I need it running on my host only adapter. By using the IP link set dev enp0 s3 or my NAT adapter down, of course, you're changing the environment, so you have to sudo that. Sudo take NAT down. So the enp0 s3 NAT adapter is down. My host only adapter is still up. So when I run fake DNS again, it runs it on my host only adapter. That's been the easiest way I've found to get this to work. In VirtualBox, your mileage may vary, but that's what I've found to be the easiest. Perfect. All right. Let's try this again. Now, I'm going through my notes, and I don't think I should be having a web server running, okay? And that kind of makes sense. I still have my temporary website running here. I'm going to stop that because, let's face it, I'm trying to analyze, and I should be controlling every little bit of the network process. So I'm going to stop the Python script running. I have started up fake DNS. What am I doing here? I have started up fake DNS. I have another tab ready to go should I need it. But I've got fake DNS running. I can actually, how do you clear? Anybody remember how to clear? Do you guys remember how to clear?
When we start the new tab, it will automatically ask you.
Okay, that's what it is. Yeah, that's what it is. Thank you very much. Who was that? Sandeep? Thank you, Sandeep.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to start a new packet capture. That's what it is. Continue without saving. Perfect. That's perfect. Now I'm going to quickly go back to my malware. I am going to detonate my malware again. You would maybe want to consider restarting everything. Maybe yes, maybe no. I know. I'm going to tell you that in the wild, I would probably go right back to the beginning so that it operates as if it should. All right, but that gets a little difficult and a little bit tedious. Again, I'm trying to expedite the process for the lecture, but in the wild, this is where the snapshots come in. You need a lot of resources for snapshots. It's better when you have a server a cloud-based solution. brbbot's been running for 30 seconds. I am going to terminate. I am going to go back to Wireshark, and I'm going to stop capturing. Perfect. So it tried to figure out, and it's sending brb.struts to my Remnux IP. Perfect. What's going on here? It's doing some port 80 stuff, and the port 80 stuff isn't working. So what's happening here is that the web traffic isn't going through. That's what we're seeing here. There's trying to do some web stuff, and it's not actually working. Okay? So what that's telling us, we have a bunch of web stuff that don't work. Port 80, port 80, port 80 is not working. Port 80, port 80, port 80 is not working. So what I need to do is I need to let it have a website running at this point. There's a couple of ways of doing this. Again, we go back to our terminal, open up a new tab, and what we're going to do is we're going to start the Apache process. Now, we could maybe do Python and see what happens, but no, let's not. Let's try starting the web server. So httpd start should start our Apache server. All right. No complaints, no problems. ps-eaf. Oh, it's an Nginx web server. All right, well, it's Nginx, so maybe that's fine. But at the end of the day, wow, there's a lot of stuff running. I started my web server. That's the important bit here. I verified it's running. Good. If you really want to verify that it's running, go to localhost. Was that a question? Localhost is running. It's got a website in there somewhere. So because I'm able to get to this point and I do not have my simple HTTP server module running in Python, the web server has started. Perfect. I'm going to go back to Wireshark. I'm going to capture a new one. I don't need to keep the old one. I am going to go back to my malware with Process Hacker, and I am going to detonate my malware again. I'm going to let it run for 30 seconds. That's pretty good. I'm going to stop or terminate the process now. So my malware is no longer running. I am going to go back and stop the capture. And right away, I'm seeing some very good results here. A couple of times it tries to, and this is probably a good reason why to give it 30 seconds. It tries the same thing a couple of times. It's not getting its results back, but it's trying the same thing a couple of times. And oh, by the way, if you're following along, we're on page 5 of the handout, right near the top. And this is what we're looking for. It's trying to get something called ads, and it is passing back an IP address. And that IP address should be familiar to you. That's the IP address of our Flare VM. And then there's some arguments going with it, which are really interesting. Now, if we double click on this, we actually see a huge block of information here. Okay? And it's sending what looks like a huge block of encrypted information. Okay? And what we can do actually, what might be a better way of doing this, is if we go right click and tell it to follow the TCP stream. that's usually going to give us a better block of easier to read information. So we can double click and look at it. That's interesting. But let's right click, follow the TCP stream. And now we have something that's a little bit easier for us to try and analyze going forward. And we are going to analyze this going forward. Okay? Any questions? Now, we've got a bunch of data that we have captured. We've got the brbconfig.temp file. We've got this data here, and it looks like it's trying to pass information from our machine to a website. Why? Well, that's the whole point. And that's, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, the whole point of today's lecture, is to understand the concept of command and control systems. The best viruses out there, most viruses, it's not even the best anymore. It's most viruses out there don't just do one thing and they're done. Once they've gained a foothold inside of your system, they are then going to communicate what they've discovered back to some server somewhere and then wait for follow-up instructions. And they will just sit there. They'll say, hey, this is me, what do you want me to do? And then at some point, they might get a response saying, okay, try this now. And then they'll try that and then they'll send it back. Some of it will be automated. Often there will be an actor out there sitting there monitoring what's going on and adapting the code based on what is discovered. Regardless, this whole process is called command and control, where you've got a server somewhere responding to requests from the malware and telling it what to do next. Spoiler alert, the server is that BRB server. Let's go back here. The BRB 3dstruts.by. And of course, Microsoft being Microsoft is out chatting to the Microsoft server again, so we could ignore that. But this is the big one. The brb.3dtuts.by, that's the server that the virus is trying to communicate with. And then when it did that, once it got an IP address, it tried calling a site called ads or ads.php, and it started passing information to it. Now, this doesn't mean anything to us right now. This block of text is probably encoded somehow. But we want to make sure that we keep track of that. Okay, so two things. First off, we're going to save this stream. We're going to save this entire stream. We're going to put it in our BRB directory, and we're going to call it a Wireshark TCP stream. Call it whatever you want, all right? And save that in case we want to open it up in Wireshark again. But the more important thing is that we want to capture everything. Now I'm going to resize my window just to show you. When I resize my window, it puts the HTTP at the end. I don't want that. I just want the numbers. Everything from 123F down to E233E. And that's it. Because everything else I can make sense of. But that block, that's what looks like it might be encrypted. That's the information I want. Right click, copy, and then open up a text editor. Can't remember what I have here. I think it's Site that I have installed here. Site text editor, perfect. So let's open up Site, paste my code, file, save as, and what did I say we were going to call it? Let's call this, in our BRB, we're going to call this encoded. So now I've captured that huge packet of data that it was trying to save. Okay? Again, how did I get that? Well, I can double click on it and get an indication of what's going on here. But a better way would be to right click, follow the TCP stream, and that's when we get this nice output here, showing us this huge block of encrypted data. By the way, double clicking on it works as well, I just realized. If you double click on it, it'll just highlight the right block of text. Right click, copy, open up a text editor. We use cite in this environment, paste it, and save it. And I recommend you call it encoded.hex, but you can call it whatever you want. So we've captured that. We've actually saved this stream. That's very good. We can probably close this, and we can close down Wireshark. At this point, we've captured what we need. If you want to, you can save the unsaved packets. That's entirely up to you. I'm not going to, so I'm not going to bother. Click and quit without saving. That's the correct one. Okay? Any questions? Now, the other thing we want to do is, and this is extra at this point, but I'm just going to take 5 minutes and do a little bit of extra work. Where's Flare? Well, Flare looks like it crashed. I don't recall shutting it down. Maybe I shut it down by mistake. Well, that's unfortunate, but I'm going to fire it up again anyway. And I want to show you something. I apologize for the delay as we fire up our Flare VM again. I must have closed, I don't know if I closed it or it crashed. I don't know what happened. That's unfortunate. Okay. I have in my in my proc stuff, I've got a bunch of stuff that I downloaded. That's fine. I don't really need that. But in my brbbot directory, I've got a bunch of work that I've done. I've got a bunch of really good stuff. And you know what? In case I blow this all away again, I want to save those artifacts. So I'm going to do that now. There's a couple of different ways, as there always is. All right, there's always different ways of doing stuff in this environment. Okay. I want to save these somewhere. And frankly, where I want to save them is probably back here in Remnux, in the directory where I've got all of my artifacts. If you want to see what that looks like, there is a file manager. It looks like some kind of a filing cabinet with drawers. But in our BRB, we've got a bunch of artifacts already starting to appear here. Wouldn't it be nice if we could put more artifacts in here? Specifically, the artifacts we have started capturing here. I need to create a path between these two. Now, I don't think there's an easy way of doing Python here, but let's try. Okay, we are in this directory. I click on the address for this directory. All right, I'm in my artifacts directory. I'm going to click on the address, and I am going to open up a window, CMD. This opens up a DOS window in the directory. A dir reveals all of my stuff. Now, Python 2-m simple HTTP server on port 80. Python 2. Okay, well, let's try Python 3. Okay, let's try Python. Module simple HTTP server is not installed. Okay, so I can't do that trick for going backwards. So I'm going to need to do something else. And we talked about this, by the way, we talked about this a while ago. There are a lot of services installed in Remnux. They're just not powered on. That's how I was able to start a web server. I was able to start a web server because in this case, Nginx is installed. It's just not running. All right. So I can probably do HTTP stop and stop the Nginx, and it's gone. Perfect. All right. So I can start and stop my web server. Imagine if I could start an SSH. I think it's with SSHD, and I'm going to try starting it and see what happens. Huzzah! It has started. Brilliant. That's great news. But I need an SSH client in Remnux. I'm sorry, in Flare, and there isn't really one started. I don't think there is. Other than the command line, there's just the SSH command line. That doesn't give it to me. So what I want is I want to try, hey, let's try installing something like WinSCP. Well, if we're going to do that, it's like everything else. We need to go out there, and I know it's going to not work, but we need to understand our environment. I'm going to go to google.com so that I can, right. I'm using fake DNS. All right, I got to stop my fake DNS, and I have to enable my NAT adapter. Perfect. That started. Reload. There's Google. And now I just want WinSCP. Download WinSCP. 519 should be fine. Right click. Oh, well, let's just click on that. Come on. Save the file. It should end up in my downloads directory. I don't use Chrome enough to know where everything is. Library, downloads. I didn't download it. Well, that seems rude. So download. Save file. Okay. There we go. I must have missed on the wrong thing. So when I take a look here, there's my WinSCP. Perfect. I want to get that over to Flare. So, as I've done before, Python. Let's just go through the history. Python 2. Okay, well, I didn't exit, so that's fine. But Python 2 -m sudo python 2-m simple HTTP server port 80. As long as I don't screw it up, things should be working well. I now am running a web server in the directory that has WinSCP. Can go over to Flare, open up a browser, go to IP address 25. There it is there. And then there's my WinSCP. Save link as. You can save it wherever you want. Sure, save it in there, that's fine. The important thing is that you download it so that you can install it. And again, this might be one of those things you want to set up before you do one of your milestone clones. Install for all users, accept, Typical install should be fine. The defaults are fine for WinSCP. The tricky thing is that you need to set up a connection. I don't need that. I'm going to start WinSCP. And I want to make a connection, and we've done this many times. So the host name is Remnux 192.168.56.25. The username is Remnux. The password, let's try Remnux and see if that works. And if Remnux doesn't work, we're going to try password. Change the stored to the password, try that. Okay. Malware, change the password to that. And if it doesn't work, oh, there it is. It had to be one of those. It had to be Remnux password or the standard malware password, which is malware. Okay, and there we go. Now I have an SSH connection, very similar to what we were doing and what we are doing in our web server security. All right, my brbbot folder is where I want to upload my brbbot artifacts that I have here. So I want to upload the things here. That, the BRB results, I want to take a look at that config. I may want to run some of these other results through the tools. Basically, I want everything except for the malware and the zip containing the malware. I want to archive them in Remnux. Drag them over. And by doing this, no, I don't want to overwrite brb results.txt. Although I think that's probably brb results flare. Just to make sure that I don't overwrite something. They're probably the same file, but I don't care. This is not strictly required, but this is a really good discipline, a really good protocol to get into. If you are going to constantly delete this machine that you are working in, the Flare VM, if you're going to blow it away and restore a clone time and time again, at some point there's value in backing up your artifacts from your analysis. You can do that by very simply starting a SSH server process in Remnux, installing WinXCP on the client, and then making a connection. Okay? The password, in case you guys missed that, the user is Remnux. The password is, as always, malware. Just like that. Okay? You can use those credentials alongside of the IP address that you set up before. For most of us, it is probably 192.168.56.25. Crying out loud. It is probably, that is going to be your server. It is probably, if you're doing what I was doing, it's going to be that IP address. Any questions on that?
Stephen,
Yes.
I have 11 questions.
You have 11 questions. Let's go.
If I attack malware in my system,
Yeah.
so here is brbbot.
Yeah.
I analyze brbbot malware.
Yeah.
But in real world, how could I find out malware easily? So one thing I know, maybe I can see some files which is making busy my processing memory or processor or whatever it is. I can point out the file and analyze the file.
Yeah.
But what is the other ways to find out easily malware in my system?
Usually, usually you don't. Usually, the malware gets blocked, and usually what happens is that something suspicious has been like. There's two different scenarios. All right. First off, in the personal world, the scenario is that you get indicators that you are infected without actually seeing that you're infected. You have indicators like ads get overwritten, or you get indicators like your computer is running noisy and hot all the time when it never did that before. You get indicators like when you turn on your computer and when it first turns on, you get a bunch of DOS windows popping up and closing, unexpected, and it never does that before. Those are indicators that there might be something wrong. Okay? And if you want, you can go through and try and find the malware on your system. But at that point, it's probably too late. Most malware does what's called, it changes itself. Once it's infected your system, it changes itself, it hides itself, and it lies dormant waiting for something to happen. Normally, you can't find it at that point. Normally, it's too late. You do a scan and hopefully remove some of the stuff that it's done to your environment. The scenario we're talking about here is that you're sitting in a SOC somewhere, a security operations center. Somebody said there's a suspicious executable and you've been handed it. And that's the scenario under which we are operating in this class. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Question 2.
That is my question.
Okay, you're just
That's all.
screwing with me. Oh, well done, sir. Well done. Well done.
That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? Okay. So that's going to be it for me. I really want you guys to be comfortable with this process, restoring a cloned version of Flare. If you want, go through and set up all the tools that you want to have in place in Flare. Modify your instance of Procmon. Install WinSCP. Install GraphViz. Install a packet tool. Install all those things. Shut down Windows and clone it. So you have all the tools in place. And then fire it up and do your attack, do your attack, do your attack. Blindly following my steps doesn't teach you anything. You doing what you need to do because you understand the workflow, that's the goal for today. Okay?